So, when we think of ourselves as Anishinaabe, we always go back to the creation story. One of the things that the creation story reminds us of is our gift as people is intuition. We call that the ability to have knowledge without knowing how we came by that knowledge. So in our creation story, we were given that. So prophecy is a big part of who we are, knowing things that were going to happen in the future. And many of those things came from dreaming, visioning, and even watching the world around us. Even in this modern time, our teachers remind us to watch what's happening in the media. Yeah, it sounds funny, but that's also prophecy can come through that way. So that gift of intuition gives us that means of seeing what's going to happen next. But if we turn our minds back to a long time ago, back when our people were living the natural way, we try to always remind ourselves of the golden time. There was a time when we were interconnected with everything in creation. Our Mother Earth gave us everything we needed, that we survived all 4 seasons. In fact, we didn't just only survive, we prospered. And how we did that was that interconnection, we say, and that way of being where we knew what was coming next. And we were people who were used to cycles. We had the day cycle, that there would be a nighttime, but you knew there would be a morning the next day. And also in the moon, there would be a new moon, there would be a full moon, there would be a new moon again, that there were lunar cycles. And both as men and women, that cycle influenced us in our waters in the way that we were in life. And then also the seasons had a cycle, the beginning of the season and the end of the season and the transition in between the seasons. Those affected us. And then also the yearly cycle, the 13 moons, where we went through that whole year. Some people call it now the cycle around the sun. But that repetition of the cycles, ingrained in us the pattern of living, daily, monthly, seasonally, and yearly. From that, we knew what was going to be the pattern itself, but also from that pattern, we got to see over various time spans, maybe 7 years, maybe 10 years, maybe 70 years even. We saw things that would happen from time to time over those cycles. And knowing those cycles helped us see into the future, what might happen 70 years from now. You could say at one time, our elders would say, this winter right now, it'll repeat itself 70 years from now. So in that sense, it's prophecy. So our people were big on knowing what was coming next, either through prophecy, through storytelling over what's happened before, or being in the moment is how we would do that. So we talk about ourselves as human beings and our evolutions and all of our changes, all the stories we have about ourselves. I remember there's even a story about, long-eared Ojibways and short-eared Ojibways. At one time, one was in vogue, the other time, the other one was in vogue. So you can tell by me, I'm a long-eared Ojibway. We're in vogue right now. No, just kidding. So we talk about prophecies. There was a time we remember too when things were amongst us. One of the oldest memories we have was a time when we could speak to the animals. We no longer carry that at this time. And also about 10 years ago, Sabe, he came to remind us that he knows our language, but we've forgotten his, is what he said to us. These conversations we've had with these beings remind us now how we were at one time. And we say many things in our culture have been lost. Early at contact, our people were very tall. They say Anishinaabe were about 6'4" on average. We're shorter now, But the prophecy said that tall people will return. There's one small prophecy you can listen to. And I look around in my community, all my nephews are about 6'4". In fact, when I stand amongst them, I feel like I'm standing in the trees. So these things that talk about how we were before contact, they would prophesy that those things would return again over time. So like I talk about the tall Anishinaabe, they're coming back. Our young women and men are taller than I am. We're getting taller. The prophecies predicted that. Some of the other things the prophecy predicted was, they say there's a story that there were shining people who walked amongst us. They were shining ones, where they were called. And the story says we forgot how to look after them. So they went away. We lost them, is what the story says. But the prophecy said that one day they would return to us again. They would come back, is what the story said. And you might know that, eh? Some of our children, they carry that name, Zhonya, attached to the name. Maybe his name is Zhonya Walgwish, eh? Shining Wolf. Or maybe her name is Zhonya Gaming, a shining lake. It's even in the names of their spirits that they've come back to us. But what is this shining? It has more than just to do with the spirit. It has a way of how they exist, how they see the world. One of the things that has been identified through the mainstream, through school, through religion, that these ones don't fit into those patterns. Those ones are, sometimes they're called oppositional defiant. Sometimes they're ADHD. Sometimes they're, nowadays, one of the things that they, autistic is what they're called, because they don't quite mesh into those systems of education and religion. So they're made to feel different. Well, for one, they are different. But from our understanding as Anishinaabe people, when that prophecy said the Shining One was returned, it speaks to these young children and young men and young adults even, who in this mainstream would carry the label ADHD, autism, and these other things, that they in fact are shining beings who came back to us. One of the things when we talk about autism, for one, they say that this is where they think, up here. It's up here is where they exist in their mind. And they have a greater capacity to understand things at that level as someone who's up there. In fact, one of the things that we acknowledge, and maybe not so much the people who live with them, the parents and their siblings, but they're generally regarded as healing. When you spend time with someone who's autistic, the conversations you can have with him, the concepts that they carry, the questions that they have, make you feel better when you leave them. That's one of the things we remember about them. And we say now we're in that place that they're coming back. How do we take care of them? How do we look after them? For one, we can acknowledge that their differences in our culture are viewed as acceptable, normal even, because we had this history where they lived with us before. We had this understanding that the way they saw things, the way that they enacted, were to keep us in a good, healthy way, that we didn't become stagnant, we didn't become stuck in a way. They moved us forward through time. They moved us forward through philosophy even. They opened up philosophies we've forgotten, that we can think in a way that's more open, more expansive is the way we do it. So when we talk about these shining people, the shining ones have returned to us. And I'm not just talking about newborns, 5 or 6 year olds. There are some adults walking around who came, my generation, maybe even a generation ago. They've been with us. And unfortunately, because they came into a time that wasn't acceptable for them, some of them have suffered from that through some of the social ills that this modern culture brings, alcoholism, suicide, all these things, detachment, all these things that they didn't feel welcome, made them feel that they didn't belong here. Many times you'll hear someone say, I was born in the wrong time. These are the people who've been coming here, the shining ones we say, who came to a time that maybe isn't quite ready for them. So one of the things we need to remember as people is that we're prophecy people, that we know the prophecy. We talk about ourselves, knowing things that were going to happen. The return of the tall ones, the return of the shining ones. And that prophecy itself said we forgot how to look after them. So one of the ways we remember now is how are we going to look after them? And we know here at Dnaag and through Mackenzie Health, there's an initiative now to where we can acknowledge a better way of helping these people teach us how to look after them. And unfortunately, that's probably the way it is. They're going to teach us how to look after them because we're the ones who forgot these special beings and the way that they think, the thoughts that they carry. So we need to have the patience. I know in my relationship with several young people, it's been encouraging for me to say to this one young guy in particularly, I said to him, you're too smart for school. His eyes went really big because he had never been told that. I said, school is a set pattern. It's a set way. It's a set format. I said, and you don't fit that format. and school isn't smart enough to fit you, I said to him. You're smarter than the school. You're smarter than that system. So you need to give them some leniency. You need to have pity on them. That somewhere in here, you would have to show them how to look after you, is what I said to him. But for a little while, he sat there and we just talked about that, because he didn't have that thinking in his mind that he was smarter than school. He didn't have that thinking in his mind that the way he was outside these patterns of religion and education, that he was gifted in seeing things that were that those systems didn't see or didn't even value in. So what he did after a while, though, when he started seeing that he could see, his own intelligence, his own mind, and the way that he shone, he eventually took measures for himself, where he decided one day, he said, I just want to be a normal kid going to school. And then he worked towards that. Now he's back in school. I wouldn't call him normal. He's still gifted. He's still a shining one. He's just found a way to help that institution communicate with him. So that's one of the things too, when we talk about these ones. A lot of times with the shining people, we just don't know how to communicate with them, because we are used to a set system. We've been conditioned through our education, like even in our culture, even in our lodge, in our ceremonies. We've been conditioned to set patterns where we're forgetting to look at those ones who move it, those ones who are outside of the thinking, who have peripheral vision. And that's one thing we need to remember. The vision they have isn't an illness, it's peripheral. They see things we don't see. Over time, maybe in our own lives, we've been conditioned not to believe our own gifts, not to believe our gift of vision, not to believe our own way of understanding life, prophecy even. But these young ones, they have that. And we need to find ways of communicating with them so they can relate to us what they see. But it begins with us also having that open mind to listen and not judge what we're hearing, but take a listening to it so that we begin to listen to them. We hear what their message is, and we begin to interpret what we're hearing. But we have to step outside of our own conditioned minds, our minds that have been conditioned in these modern patterns. So that's on us to take the time to step away from what we think we know and learn from these young ones and these people who think outside of what the mainstream calls normal. So that's where we are. We're at a place where we're learning how to look after these shining ones again. And like I want to remind you, they're not just young people. There are some adults who are walking around like that already. So we need to acknowledge some of us are already shining people. And we're actually, you might see that in the forefront of some of the movements in our culture, in our philosophies, even in our arts, in our films, in our acting. These shining ones are I'll say it that way, infiltrating the mainstream. The gifts that they have, that's the way our young people will be. And the shining ones gave this to us at one time, the capacity to move forward as a culture, capacity to move forward as a race even, and integrating incredible philosophies into our being, incredible things, concepts. Imagine how beautiful it would be to remember talking to the animals, to being able to converse to Sabe in his own language, and also other things we remember, the little people, communicating with them. When they come into our house and steal things, figure out what that's all about and what we need to do for them. These were aspects of our culture that are easily transferable into any element of we are, and in any element of individuality, in terms of, seeing things from a bigger scope, a more holistic perspective. But for one, the shining ones, they're here to teach us. And hopefully, we can have our eyes and ears open for that, because the 7 fires prophecy had said that. The red one would take an introspection. He'd be asked a question by the paleface, and he would look inside himself and come up with an answer. And if he came up with the right answer, it says, then the 8th generation would come, and they would know eternal peace. Eternal harmony is what it says. But if the red one internalized and came up with the wrong answer, then it says the world as we know would end. And, prophecies they're open to interpretation. But these new ones that are here, maybe that's the internalizing, looking at these gifted ones, looking at these shining ones. They're the beginnings, maybe, of showing us into the eighth fire. And we need to acknowledge that. Remind ourselves that we forgot how to look after them at one time. Now the onus is on us to look after them again, so that this time we don't lose them. They don't become disinterested. They don't become disassociated. They don't lose meaning for life, but they can see their full value in this entire way of being. Miigwech.